Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your cell phones, and there will be multiple networking breaks throughout the day. Out of respect for our speakers, please refrain from speaking during the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Nufti's President and CEO, Dr. Saeed Ganji.
Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to personally welcome each and every one of you, whether joining us in person or virtually, especially those joining us from Iran, to the second annual Iran Conference. Hosting this now annual gathering of the country's preeminent experts, journalists, and activists is a particular honor for us, because as you know, our role here at Nufti is to engage and mobilize the Iranian-American community to support a U.S. foreign policy towards our home country based on human rights and democracy. It is in that spirit that we're all gathered here today. Throughout history, Iran has been occupied by foreign forces multiple times. Not a single one of them lasted. The 44 years of Islamic Republic compared to over 2,500 years of Iranian civilization is nothing but a single black page in the book of Iran's history. Totalitarian regimes never lasted, and this one is no exception. Of course, we're here also gathered today to aftermath of devastating Hamas terrorist attack on Israel last weekend. This attack has Islamic Republic fingerprints all over it. Despite words of support from Israel, for Israel, what we see from the White House is a policy that supports its main enemy, the Islamic Republic. The path for the White House and for the West to end the senseless violence against innocent civilians is neither war with Iran nor appeasing the regime. Instead, the path to peace in the Middle East and safety and security for all lies in supporting the people of Iran to free themselves from the Islamic Republic that is bringing terror on them and chaos on the entire region. It is through a secular, democratic Iran that the Middle East can be at peace, and that the Iranian people are fighting to make that a reality. But they need our help. I am grateful to our exceptional speakers and moderators who agreed to be part of this two-day conference. We are thankful for what I know will be your thoughtful insight and valuable expertise. My special thanks goes to my team at Nufti for putting this conference together. My hope is that you will enjoy the next couple of days and leave this conference with more than you came in with, and that together we can show that irrespective of our political or ideological differences, we are all united in our larger goal and are all support of the people of Iran. But before I leave, I just wanted to touch on something. Everybody here, I guess most everybody, I should say, know Cameron. Cameron is a nice guy, very young, energetic. He runs around all the time. He's full of instructions and basically suggestions. He's been working for us full-time for about 3 years, and I am so ever grateful to him. He had a meeting at the State Department a few months ago. I guess a couple of weeks after his meeting, Rob Malley was out of the job. So I guess under investigation or whatever. About a couple of months ago, I was in Europe. He called me up and he says, I got an opportunity to meet the Speaker of the House, Mr. McCarthy. Should I go? I said, okay. He flew all the way to Bakersfield to meet the Speaker. A couple of weeks later, the poor guy doesn't have a job. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set up a time so where he can go and see Biden. Maybe we're in better shape. Anyway, thank you so much.
Please welcome Nufti's Vice President, Kamran Khansarinian.
Good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me? Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dr. Ganji, for your kind introduction. Of course, we're a nonpartisan organization, but we do have a few suggestions for President Biden. So if he is watching, we hope he'll take the meeting very soon. But Dr. Ganji, thank you very much for your leadership of Nufti. It's unique, I think, amongst Iranian Americans and Iranians to have folks who have been involved in the fight to free Iran for so long, to be as generous and as gracious as Dr. Ganji is, to support young Iranian Americans, to support new leaders, to step back and push them forward and try and control our mistakes and make sure we don't make too many of them. So here at Nufti, we're extremely fortunate to be under the leadership and tutelage of Dr. Ganji and, of course, our excellent board led by Mr. Razvan, who is also here today. So thank you all for all that you do. And thank you all for being here today. We have a fantastic 2 days of panels lined up for you. We're very excited. Today's panels are focused on Iran today, what's going on in Iran, Iran-US relations, Iran in the region, and tomorrow we'll focus a bit more on Iran tomorrow. What will the future of Iran look like, a secular, democratic Iran? What does that offer for the people of Iran? What does that offer for the people of the region? And what does that offer for the United States and American interests? What I can guarantee you is that our speakers have a variety of viewpoints. They come from different ideological or partisan perspectives, but none of them is a member of the Iran Experts Initiative led by Javad Zarif. That I can guarantee you. They're all excellent experts in their own right, and we're so lucky to have them. Of course, as Dr. Ganji mentioned, this is happening at a particular poignant moment. Throughout the conference and the many breaks that we have, I hope that you all will take time to visit Blossoms of Bravery, the exhibit, the photo exhibit that our policy director, Navid Mohebi, and our team put together over the past several months. It was put on display at the U.S. Congress, indeed on the day that the MASA Act was voted into law, 410-3. And that shows the images of Iranian protesters who were murdered by the Islamic Republic, hundreds of them after the murder of Mahsa Amini 1 year ago, the protesters who were blinded, the protesters who, after they were killed, their gravestones were desecrated by the Islamic Republic. So I hope you'll take a chance to look at that, because that's why we're all here today, for innocent people in Iran who for 44 years have been killed, for the innocent people this past week in Israel who were slaughtered by that same ideology, radical Islamism that overtook Iran 44 years ago, that has caused havoc and chaos throughout the Middle East, and day by day is taking more and more victims. And so I would invite you, if you would, to visit that throughout the day. But of course, we're also thinking, in addition to Iranian victims, of those Israelis and all innocent civilians who have been killed and who likely will be, unfortunately, killed going forward. Thank you for being here. In honor of them, let's make this a conference that is not here just to talk about the problems, but to offer solutions to those problems. Because it is not until we have solutions for the Islamic Republic, for the United States, that innocent civilians will not continue to be killed. So we're here in the spirit of finding solutions. Thank you all for being part of this, this two-day adventure. It's our sincere pleasure to host you. And with that, we'll get on to our panels. Thank you.
Our first panel of this year's conference is Hostage Diplomacy, How to Stop the Trend, which will discuss the Islamic Republic's track record of hostage-taking, Western countries' mistakes in dealing with it, and explore strategies to end this trend. Our speakers are Gazelle Sharmahd, a German-American activist who is not only fighting to save her father, Jimmy's life, but is advocating for hostages and political prisoners in Iran. Nizar Zakka, a former hostage in Iran and board member of the Hostage Aid Worldwide. David Peyman is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Counter-Threat Finance and Sanctions. Gabriel Noronha is a former advisor to the State Department and now a fellow at JINSA. The panel is moderated by Andrew Ghalili, Nufti's senior policy analyst and author of a forthcoming report from Nufti on hostage-taking. Welcome. We will now hear a short presentation from Andrew Ghalili.
The Islamic Republic has a long history of hostage-taking, beginning with the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979. However, after the establishment of the government of so-called reformist Mohammad Khatami in 1997, the regime began more specifically targeting dual and foreign national citizens in Iran for hostage-taking. Most recently, the United States agreed to a hostage deal that included the release of at least $6 billion in frozen Iranian funds and 5 Iranian nationals serving prison sentences in the U.S., in exchange for the Islamic Republic releasing 5 American citizens that had been held hostage. For the Islamic Republic, hostage-taking is more than a mere rogue criminal activity. It is a consistent, publicly stated foreign policy and economic tool. Former regime officials like Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani and Mohsen Rezai have openly acknowledged the regime's use of hostages as a tool of diplomacy and economic leverage. Rezai, during his 2021 presidential campaign, stated that he would fix Iran's economic issues by, quote, taking 1,000 American hostages, so America will have to pay billions of dollars in exchange for their freedom. By better understanding the regime's strategies and motivations, we can begin to develop more effective countermeasures. That's why Nufti has researched and written a report outlining who the regime targets, what they hope to achieve by wrongfully detaining foreign nationals, and how the United States and its Western allies can improve their response to curb or end this threat. First, it's important to know under what charges the Islamic Republic usually detains hostages. The most common and, of course, most trumped-up charges are espionage and propaganda against the regime. Now let's get into the Islamic Republic's targets for hostage-taking. Who's at risk and how are they treated? In general, foreign nationals and Iranian dual nationals, especially those who are also citizens of the United States, the United Kingdom, European Union nations, or Canada, are particularly vulnerable to detention. Now, as we all know, the Iranian diaspora is especially connected to their mother country and often travels there to see family or to visit Iran's natural beauty. Sadly, this puts them at risk. Another category of targeted individuals is journalists, especially but not exclusively those who report on sensitive topics such as human rights abuses or government corruption. Now, the regime also targets academics, especially those who research or teach about controversial topics such as women's rights or environmental issues. But even academics researching seemingly non-controversial topics are also targeted. Shi Wei, for example, a Chinese American studying the Qajar dynasty at Princeton University, was arrested in August 2016 despite his research having no contemporary political implications. Now, of course, hostages are often mistreated. They are denied fair trials, including the right to a lawyer, the right to a speedy trial, and the right to confront their accusers. Hostages also face solitary confinement, beatings, psychological abuses, and other forms of torture. So why does the Islamic Republic take foreign nationals hostage? Well, the regime has multiple motives, which we will address in detail in the forthcoming report. But the primary motivation behind the regime's hostage-taking strategy is the use of detained foreign nationals as bargaining chips in diplomatic negotiations. Detaining foreign nationals provides the Iranian regime with leverage to extract concessions from foreign governments. Such concessions might include the release of Iranian prisoners held abroad or the easing of sanctions and cash windfalls. This idea of hostage-taking for payment is so prevalent in the Islamic Republic that high-ranking Iranian officials, including IRGC Commander Hassan Abbasi, have gone so far as to call Iran's hostage-taking strategy the, quote, solution to Iran's economic problems, and have even suggested balancing Iran's budget through the taking of 10 or 20 US hostages. Now, knowing all of this, what can and should the United States do? Well, here's a few of Mufti's top recommendations, while a full list will be available in our forthcoming report. First, the United States should impose measurable, irrevocable sanctions on the Islamic Republic for its hostage-taking. The regime in Iran is getting a heftier payday for each hostage it takes, with the number now sitting around $1.2 billion. Thus, the US and its European allies need the regime to know that it, too, will pay a higher price for each hostage taken. Every time the regime takes an American or European hostage, the retaliation it faces in the form of economic sanctions should increase in intensity. The United States should increasingly place restrictions on regime officials and regime assets, while specifically including in the messaging that it's doing so as a direct response to and consequence of hostage-taking. This would send a clear message to the regime that its practice of wrongfully detaining foreign nationals in order to extract concessions such as sanctions relief will not be tolerated and will instead be met with actual consequences. Furthermore, the sanctions imposed on the Islamic Republic should be measurable and, where possible, irreversible. For example, the Islamic Republic assets that are frozen or confiscated by sanctions as a result of the regime's hostage-taking should not be kept in escrow. This would risk such assets being released in the future, as recently done by the Biden administration in the 2023 hostage deal. Instead, the US should deploy those assets as it sees fit, thus making the penalty imposed on the Islamic Republic irreversible. Precedent for such irreversible action was already recently set by the Biden administration itself when it sent weapons confiscated from the Islamic Republic proxy force, the Houthis, to the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Now, in this case, the frozen assets can be deployed to inflict maximum consequences on the Islamic Republic by, for example, supporting internet access for the people of Iran, supporting democracy promotion efforts in Iran, and supporting the families of former hostages and other victims of the Islamic Republic. Additionally, the US and its allies should also impose measurable diplomatic consequences on the Islamic Republic for its hostage-taking. The US should use its diplomatic leverage amongst allies at international institutions to hold the Islamic Republic accountable. Suggested steps include lobby to remove the Islamic Republic from United Nations committees and leadership positions, ban travel for Islamic Republic officials to the United States, and issue and pursue Interpol red notices. When taking such steps to diplomatically pressure the regime in response to its hostage-taking, the US government messaging must be clear that such steps are taken as direct consequences of the regime hostage-taking. Now, additionally, Western governments should consider retaliatory measures against the regime's proxies. Whereas the regime targets innocent people, the United States, of course, should more aggressively target and detain actual criminals, like regime affiliates and those in Iran's vast terrorist proxy networks. If all other avenues have been thoroughly explored and proven ineffective, the consideration of targeting these individuals may be warranted. Implementing this approach could yield promising results, as it would place the regime in a position similar to the one that it imposes on other countries. Additionally, the United States should establish a comprehensive register of regime hostage takers involved in the apprehension, targeting, and mistreatment of American hostages. This list should encompass various individuals, including judges, prosecutors, agents, prison guards, and anyone else implicated in such acts. Now, finally, the State Department should ban the use of U.S. passports to or through Iran. There are many reasons to visit the beautiful country of Iran, of course. Whether for academic or journalistic research, for business, or to visit family, traveling to Iran from a Western country can be very enticing, especially for diaspora Iranians longing to return home. Nonetheless, that appeal cannot and does not outweigh the risks and consequences of going to Iran while the Islamic Republic continues to occupy its government and employ a consistent strategy of wrongfully detaining foreign nationals. Hostage taking is not normal behavior. It contravenes the very principles of diplomacy, and it will likely continue as long as the Islamic Republic does. But we think these temporary steps can at least help curb the trend.
Thank you, everybody. I think we'll jump right into it, and we won't have to hear me talk too much more. So we can start with Gazelle. We have a great panel here, and we'll get it started. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So can you start? I think everyone listening is probably familiar with your father's case. Can you start, maybe give us some background and then an update on his status? What's the last communication you've had with him, with government officials, whether here or in Germany?
Sure. Hi, everybody. And first of all, thank you to Nufti for having this conference, and thank you for having the hostage panel being the first panel, because we all saw right now with what happened in Israel that hostage taking is getting worse. We just did it with one move by giving $6 billion to the state sponsor of hostage takers and criminals, and now we have more American and European hostages than ever before, so congratulations to that. And let me talk about my dad real quick. My dad is Jamshid Sharmahd. Just like me, he is a German and a US national. He's not a citizen of the Islamic regime of Iran. He doesn't have a passport, an Iranian passport. He did not travel there. My dad lived in the US for 2 decades. He was a critic of the regime, and he was first almost assassinated here on US soil by agents of the regime, and then he was kidnapped and taken to Iran. How he is right now, I don't know, because since the moment they kidnapped him and took him, he has been subject to forced disappearance, which means we don't know where they're holding my dad hostage. Nobody has seen him in 3 years. He can call us maybe once or twice a year under strict supervision of the agents of the Islamic regime. We know that he has spent over 1,100 days in complete solitary confinement. That means he sees nobody, not a lawyer, nobody from the embassy. He can't talk to a human being that doesn't want to kill him. We know that all of his rights have been taken. He has been taken through sham trials, because that's what they do to all the hostages, as you explained in there. They first try to destroy their name, criminalize them. So the roles of victims and criminals is reversed in the Islamic regime of Iran, and they use their judiciary system to set that up and show activists, victims, hostages as criminals, and the hostage takers are the ones that are judges or lawyers and putting these harsh sentences on them. My dad received the death sentence this year, and everything is becoming worse right now, because we know at least the US was trying to get hostages back. As you know, we are also German citizens, and Germany, excuse me, has not even acknowledged that their citizens are hostages. They have not even said that they want the release of their hostages, and they haven't done anything. The US, at least, because they have also this hostage problem, said they want to bring hostages back, and we're not against bringing hostages back, especially not me, but the way it was done right now is catastrophic. And we went to DC. We had a sit-in strike in front of the State Department for a week to let them know we are here. You're not talking to the hostage families right now. They finally met with us. They made a deal with the hostage takers. They released $6 billion or more to the hostage takers and brought some Americans back and left my dad behind to die. Right now, with the US and Germany being involved in what's going on in Israel and Hamas, I'm more scared than ever that whatever our countries are going to be doing there, the Islamic regime would retaliate by murdering my dad, by doing something to the hostages that are left behind there. So I don't even know what to say to this catastrophic thing that they have done, but they have not communicated with us. They are not honest about what's happening. They're still out there on TV saying that the money they spent on these hostage takers is for humanitarian reasons, and we have to explain over and over again the principle of fungibility of money, and my 2-year-old understands that. She understands when I give her a lollipop and say, this is for after lunch, and dad gave her another one, she says, well, dad's is not for after lunch, so I'm going to use dad's now, and mom's for after lunch. So she understands it, and she's 2. And we have to explain that to politicians. So yeah, this is the update on my dad. He has been tortured this entire time. He has no access to medication. He cannot call me when he needs to. He has no access to fresh air. He doesn't know if it's day or night. His teeth have been knocked out by the hostage takers. And they want to murder him now. So I don't know how much worse it can get, but this is where we are right now.
Thank you for that. And that's all tragic. And I think to me, one of the more disappointing things is what we saw in terms of the lack of communication to you and your family and the Ghalili family. And I think, as you know, of speaking with other hostage families, is they have a duty to communicate with the families and assist. And it doesn't seem like, at least in your case, they did that at all, really, until we went on a strike and we went to Congress and had all these meetings. Yeah.
Exactly. The thing is, we have policies in place. We have the PPD 30 since Obama's time. This is 2015. We have the Hostage Recovery Act, the Levinson Act, which is law right now. We even have executive orders, the last one by President Biden in 2022. All of them say, first of all, the State Department has to communicate with the families. They didn't. They didn't talk to me for 3 years, same with the Ghalili family. They say that we should not give concessions to hostage takers. Well, we just did. They say all of these things, and we're not following the rules that we have in place, even though they're not enough to start off with, but we're not even doing that.
And I think it's important to note, as soon as they did comment on his case, there was an immediate reaction in Iran, and it arguably bought him more time. They pay more attention, right?
Exactly. That is one other thing that our governments do wrong or lie about. They tell us to be silent. They tell us that publicity or anything like that can harm the person. And we know from hostages that came back, every single hostage that was released tells us as soon as the public paid attention, that's when my conditions changed. That's when I got out of solitary confinement. That's when everything became better. So they lie about that too and tell us to be silent, not to use the H word. Don't talk about hostages. Don't go to the media. Don't go to the press, because hostages are an inconvenience for our governments who want to continue their business with the terrorists.
Thank you, yeah. Nizar, I think if you want to add on to any of that, please feel free, but if you can also talk about some of the things that were mentioned in the video in terms of what does the regime in Iran get out of their extensive hostage-taking business, and just how extensive is it?
It's very sad. It's very sad what I heard from Gazelle. It's the stories that every single hostage goes through, and it's a business model that Iran is doing. They start by identifying a hostage, deciding and kidnapping it. It's a profile. Then they will do the sham trials, phase 2. Then they start marketing the product, and then they do the sale. And this is how they do it. It's a business that has been developed over the years. As an organization, as former hostages, we created an organization called Hostage Aid. It's an organization that groups hostages from all around the world, and families anywhere around the world, they're facing the same. This is a crime that is being committed by government or non-government, And this is what goes on for every single one of us went through that. Having said that, I see that Iran benefits a lot since 1979. It benefited a lot from hostage taking. It became one of the pillars of the foreign policy of Iran. It's not, they use it to get concessions from the West, but at the same time, another pillar is to stop any openness that can happen to Iran. They're creating this wall between the West or the world and Iran, so the people of Iran cannot have access to openness. And one of the issues that we always, one of the words that they say, so we should not travel to Iran, or Iranian cannot go back to Iran. I believe this is not fair, because we are putting all the burden on Iranian people not to go visit their parents, their loved one, and this is not the solution. The solution is to be stronger, to have a firm actions that will stop this malign activity that Iran has been doing for so long. And as you see, so just to comment on Gazelle, what happened in '79, after they did the swap, after they released the hostages at the US Embassy, they turned to the proxy, and all the hostages started happening in Lebanon in the '80s. By Hezbollah. They start taking hostages, foreign hostages in Lebanon. And now, if you see, after the swap of the $6 billion swap, you see the hostages have been taken in Israel, in Gaza, and in Israel now. It's the same, they use a proxy, and this is the policy they do. And when they feel they cannot take hostages in Iran, they use a proxy to do exactly this. So for my personal experience, what happened I was taken hostage in 2015, and I was taken in September. The JCPOA was signed in July 2015, and everything was perfect. You go to any CEO in the US, anywhere, about Iran, everybody wanted to connect with Iran. It was a lovely country, young population, very highly educated, very good. Everybody wanted to open business in Iran. At that time, I was the vice chairman of the Global ICT, Information and Communication Technology Organization. I was high profile in internet freedom. I was leading the effort around the world for internet freedom, and I was speaking in conferences all around the world. So I was officially invited by the vice president of Iran to speak at her conference for women empowerment, and using technology for women empowerment. And I went there, and on my way back, they stopped me, they put me in a car, they threw me in a cell, and I spent 4 years over there. For no crime, for nothing, just for accepting an invitation and going to Iran. So what they wanted at that time, they wanted to send a signal to the world that they do not welcome any openness. They are okay to sign a JCPOA, but let's keep any openness on the side. So once I was taken in September, all foreign technology companies as Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, everybody was so eager to go to Iran to open, and it was like a very clear message to all these international companies to stop. And they did not. Since September 2015, they stopped, even though in January 2016, the JCPOA was ratified by the UN, and the sanctions were relieved and everything. But the message was very clear by the Iranian regime that we're not open for openness. Okay, so do not come here. And and they were very successful. They are smart. They use hostage taking in a very smart way, and they take us one at a time. They take the US on a time, the French, the German, everyone at one time, and they negotiate one-on-one. And this is what I don't understand why the world haven't realized yet that they have to unify, to work together, and to have one single policy toward hostages. Because we believe in order to to stop this business model taken by Iran, and now other countries will follow because it's so successful. Everybody want to get to gain some concessions. They can do the same now because they know now with the $6 billion, convince anybody in Iran from the IRGC that a hostage is not worth 1.2 billion. Even if we agree it's for humanitarian whatever, okay, we agree, but the hostage taker will never agree because he believes he got $1.2 billion per hostage, and this is one of the criteria. So we as an organization and as former hostages, we believe that the best approach is to work all together on a multi-stakeholder approach, going from grassroots, creating awareness, getting the people of Iran and people of the world understand that hostage-taking will only get the society, bring damages to the society, stop development, economic development and political development, and violate all the human rights. And then this maybe will get a global understanding about fighting hostage taking and taking one position globally toward hostage taking. Thank you.
No, thank you for that important context. I think the last thing you mentioned is really important, that it can't just be each country going out for themselves. Iran is doing this to everyone. They should be working together. Yeah. I know we want to get into the 6 billion. Before we get there, for Gabriel and David, if you want to jump in on this, what do you think led to the fact that the Obama and Biden administrations were forced to cough up billions of dollars to get hostages back, whereas the administration between them was able to conduct one-for-one prisoner swaps? For Gabriel, please. Yeah. And David, if you...
So I'll answer the question, and I'll go a little broader, and then we can
Please.
go back to you. The Iranian regime always starts with a strong negotiating position. They're always going to ask for a maximalist position. If you know, there's the joke: if you've ever bought a rug anywhere, you know that you don't say yes to the starting price. Unfortunately, that's not the approach that the Obama administration, and in my view, the Biden administration took. When I was negotiating and working on negotiations for the release of Wang Shiwei and Michael White, the initial Iranian position was they wanted every single Iranian prisoner out in exchange for American prisoners. And that included terrorists, people who had killed police officers, violent criminals. And we said that's simply not going to happen. We said we will do a fair exchange or nothing. We will not give you a single cent. And when Iran realized they couldn't get something out of the hostages, they became more of a liability than an asset. And that's one of the important things about speaking out, is that it raises the cost for Iran internationally. It says there's a stigma on them. When I'm in the streets of Europe, I'll see posters saying, you know, here's this academic imprisoned on Iran. That makes every European question whether they should travel to Iran. That means there's less revenue. And so part of this is putting a price on the actual hostage inside Iran and saying, this isn't a cash cow. This is a liability on you. We're going to shame you. We're going to put out videos. We're going to harass you in the press for every single day that they're in prison. Then they say, actually, we kind of want to get rid of these people. We still want something out of them, but we want to do a deal, and we want to do a deal fast. Ultimately, we were able to do one-for-one prisoner exchanges in the Trump administration that I think are a good basis. They're a fair basis. I don't like having to give up duly convicted criminals, but if that's the price to get Americans home, that's what's necessary. It is also true that the Iranian regime, the system, puts a higher value internally on dual citizens. They, for some reason, want more out of it. That shouldn't be an excuse for us to cave and give more $6 billion. One thing on the $6 billion that I have to address, because there's a lot of misinformation. There's the idea that none of it will go to terrorism, that will go to food and medicine. The way I like to think about it is there's money that if you get money into a savings account, you maybe will spend more out of your checkings account or your credit cards. And that's exactly what will happen here We also have seen a strong history of Iran using medicine that it receives and selling it on the black market. There were 19 trucks full of medicine in 2019 that were caught at the Iraqi border that they were trying to sell to the black market. That was while the Iranian regime was claiming that they had a medicine shortage because of sanctions. That's not what happens when you're in a shortage. So that's not true. So that was a quick answer.
No, thank you. I think, and maybe David can address this too, you talked a lot about the strong negotiating during the deals, but was it more, the difference in the result more a result of strong negotiating or a stronger negotiating position from having a policy that placed more pressure on the regime?
To Gabe's point, I think we had a maximalist sanctions campaign against Iran. And one of the biggest lies that has not been addressed is that our sanctions were unilateral. In fact, I traveled to almost every country in the world, and we got partners from Germany to Panama, who's the biggest flag registry in the world, flagging Iranian ships to immediately deflag. So Iran knew that although these countries didn't want to go along with our policy in many instances, they had no choice because we gave them a very clear choice, and that was you're either with us or you're not. And if you're not with us, you're going to bear consequences. Some of them are going to be economic, some of them are going to be diplomatic, but there's going to be consequences to pay because this is our policy. And I think when Iran realized, not only to Gabe's point, that we were going to have a fair deal and they weren't going to bargain us down, and also that we were so strong on our sanctions campaign that they realized that there's really nothing else they can get. And as Gabe said, they were going to be a liability. But I would also say that the release of hostages was one of 5 key objectives that the Trump administration had. And obviously the nuclear program, ballistic missiles, sponsorship of terrorism, and malign regional activity in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon were also key objectives. And while we had a very strong, robust sanctions regime against Iran, there was more to do. There's frankly more that we could have and should have done. The Iranians were very clear that they were going to time us out, that they could tolerate potentially I was appointed August 6, 2018, which is the first day we really snapped back sanctions. So it was not 4 years of sanctions, it was less than that. But they could bear that. They would have a harder time bearing 7 years. But I believe they still could have bared those 7 years because we see time and again that sanctions is not a policy. Sanctions is not a strategy. Sanctions is simply a tool, and it has to be a tool to be used as part of a larger strategy that will help release hostages, not only American, but other national hostages. And one area that I hope won't be repeated if there's a second Trump administration, a second term, is that the administration will devote significant military assets to the Persian Gulf and will have a threat posture against Iran that would be a serious consideration of military assets. And that's one thing that was missing. Instead, quite the opposite happened. Under Defense Secretary Mattis, key military assets were diverted away from the Gulf. They went to the South China Sea and in that theater. And the Iranians are very, very smart, and they picked up on the fact that they were going to be secure because there was no military threat. There was only one time in history that Iran, this regime, made a change in behavior against its own will and interest, and that was when it accepted a truce with Saddam. What happened during that time? In April 1988, we had Operation Praying Mantis, where the US Navy sunk Iranian vessels, where we attacked Iranian oil platforms. A couple of months later, the USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian civil airliner. That was an accident, but the Iranians didn't view it as an accident. They viewed it as intentional. And so you had, from Iran's perspective, a real military threat in conjunction with a very strong sanctions regime. Our sanctions regime was frankly much stronger than what we've ever had. I think it could be stronger yet again under a second Trump term. But you had those two key components where you had a military threat posture, military assets in the Gulf, as well as sanctions that pressured the regime, the Iranian regime. Khomeini said this was a bitter poison that he had to swallow. They were very much opposed to a truce with Saddam, but they had to take it. And so that same approach could be used to achieve the 5 objectives, one of the key ones being obviously the release of hostages.
If I can.
Is it off?
Yeah, now we're back on. If I can go off of one of your points and also one of Nizar's, you talked about how our sanctions weren't really unilateral. And I think, unilateral American sanctions can and were more powerful than the multilateral sanctions from 2011 to 2014. They brought, multilateral sanctions only brought Iran's sanctioned oil down to about 1.1 million barrels of oil. Unilateral ones brought them down to about 300,000. It's still the case that they'd be more powerful if they were multilateral. And this goes to sort of Nizar's point about hostage diplomacy. When we put sanctions on Iranian hostage takers on the Levinson Act, what that really says is you cannot come to the United States, you can't have money and assets in the United States, but they can still have pads in Geneva and London and Paris. What we really have to do is work with the European partners and say, look, they took one of your people hostage, they are out of the United States too. If they take any of ours hostage, they need to be banned and sanctioned from all of Europe. Work with the Middle East partners too, not just Europe. And say, if you are involved in this, you will never leave Iran again. You will never have a luxury apartment in Frankfurt and Paris. And that's gonna make all these officials second guess themselves and what their actions are doing.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to, one point that you guys all made, you said, or in your question it was implied that the US administration was forced to pay $6 billion to get the hostages out. That means, and I see it differently. I don't see it in that way, and I'm not an expert, as you guys, but I've looked at every hostage case like in the last 44 years. And when every administration is doing it wrong, when we all see that paying $6 billion to hostage takers is gonna make it worse, we can assume that they see it too. We're not the only clever people in the world that figured this out. So when you do this mistake over and over and over again, at what point do we think that you're forced to do it or make a mistake? And at what point do we acknowledge that maybe this is not a mistake? Maybe our governments, our Western governments, are using hostages as a front because they don't care about hostage. They've shown me that through my dad's case. They left a hostage under death sentence behind. They have showed us this. They don't care about human rights in Iran because they don't care what happens to the people there. They don't even care about the hostages or the people of Israel. They're forced to flex muscles right now because we have a big Jewish community that is doing that and that's putting pressure on them. But why do I think that this is not a mistake, but this is a front? Because when you're paying $6 billion to a terrorist regime, you don't do it for nothing. You don't do it for releasing 5 prisoners. You are doing it because you're getting something back. So what are you getting back? If we assume, and I'm not assuming that out of nothing, I'm assuming that on the facts that we just exposed, that the Islamic regime's lobby group infiltrated our government for at least a decade. They're in our academia, they're in our universities, they're in our media, they're in our State Department, they're in our Department of Defense, they're part of the people who made this deal. So if we know that, and we know we're giving them $6 billion, and just a fraction of that we assume is coming back, a fraction, 1% of $6 billion, how much is that? My math is back. $600 million, let's say that. Coming back, funding these people who then make another campaign and have these think tanks that tell the next administration it's good to continue negotiating with these people, then at that point, to me, this is not a mistake anymore. So we have to do investigations to see who in our current administration thought this is a great idea and investigate and see what their relationship to these governments, to these lobbies, to these think tanks are.
Please, David.
You know, one of the frustrations I had was oftentimes speaking to colleagues, especially the NSC, and being frustrated about some folks not being on the same, policy idea. And the response was, some folks are frankly wearing different jerseys. And so the point is, you don't need folks infiltrating. There is a legitimate disagreement on policy approach. And this administration has said they believe negotiations is the best path. The previous Obama administration believed the same. The key difference between the Biden and the Obama administration is the Obama administration actually significantly ramped up sanctions before the JCPOA, which is kind of what opened the door to the JCPOA. But there's just a legitimate policy difference. And so I don't know if it's about an investigation more than there's a difference of opinion. And the $6 billion was not necessarily only for the release of terrorists. The administration was quite clear for a very long time that they intended to release the billions, particularly from South Korea, as a goodwill gesture to facilitate negotiations on the nuclear portfolio. So there's a larger purpose for the release of the $6 billion, and there's a policy difference, obviously, between this administration and the previous. And it doesn't seem like at least this approach has been working. And one of the most frustrating parts of the approach for the private sector, many companies of which I represent in the maritime industry and the energy industry, is that because there's a lack of enforcement of current sanctions that are on the books, bad actors are taking advantage of it. And it's causing significant economic harm to ship owners, vessel owners, legitimate flag registries that are actually seeking to abide and comply with US sanctions and are getting taken advantage of by an Iranian fleet that's exporting oil in violation of sanctions that are not being exported. And the same thing goes in respect to Russia. There's a large shadow fleet in Russia that is exporting 90% of Russian oil in violation of the US and G7 price cap policy. So the frustration about not implementing and enforcing sanctions that are on the books is being felt by the private sector quite significantly.
That's a good transition to where we want to go, because a lot of attention is being paid to the $6 billion, which, as you note, is part of this larger understanding, right? Which included money, $10 billion unfrozen from Iraq, I think $7 billion unfrozen from the IMF, and according to Ioanni, 80 billion from unenforced oil sanctions since 2021, right? Which maybe wasn't part of the understanding, but the lax sanctions is an important part here. So when it comes to this attention that's being paid on the $6 billion right now, first, can the $6 billion be refrozen? What's the process there? And it's obviously relevant, but how much more relevant is all that other money and the general policy being so weak and allowing money to flow into the regime?
So I'll take the first question. Yes, the $6 billion can be refrozen. What was done was waivers were given. So the reason the money's been stuck in South Korea is the banks didn't want to move it. They didn't want to run afoul of US sanctions. And it took a waiver from the Treasury Department to give the banks confidence that they could move the money into European banks first to make it into euros, and then from euros into the Qatari banks. The money, that waiver can be rescinded. And there have been multiple bills dropped in both the Senate and the House yesterday that do just that. I think those bills will be given a vote in the House probably next week as soon as there's a speaker. And it is likely that there will be a vote on the Senate floor next week to refreeze those and rescind those waivers. If that happens, it gets a little bit more complicated. The money will be stuck in Qatar. And then, as David knows, it will get more complicated from there. So it is possible to refreeze it, and that is up to Congress. What we've seen in the last day really is a number of lawmakers, not just Republicans, but at least 5 Democrat senators,
I think
probably
it's 8
a
or
lot
9,
more.
yeah.
8, wow. 8 coming and saying that money needs to be refrozen. The Biden administration has now said that is under consideration, which is important.
Thank you. And as far as all of the other money that's been allowed to flow into Iran. Nizar, do you want to touch on this comprehensive policy that's...
Yeah, we are just, they have been only highlighting the 6 billion because it is within the agreement, but what was released from Iraq, for Iraq to pay, and from Japan and from the IMF, it's much more, but they were able to release it for humanitarian purposes, for the electricity in Iraq, for other things, and this is like, that's why we are only highlighting the 6 billion, because it is within this agreement of releasing the hostage.
We didn't want to make the panel too much about the horrific acts that are going on in Israel right now, but I think Gabriel, you shared a post with a Hamas member saying, you know, America just traded billions for hostages. Why not give us money for hostages? Basically, alluding to the fact that, you know, they see what's happening when you pay for hostages, and they think they can get the same.
So this is all about, do you believe that you can benefit from taking hostages? Do you believe that there is a supply of hostages that you can acquire? And is there a demand for the hostages after you take them? And each act that we do to prove that statement is true increases the value statement. In terms of supply, I probably disagree with Nizar, which is fine. I don't believe that Americans should be traveling to Iran. We have a level 4 travel warning. What I advocated right after the hostage deal was that the State Department use a mechanism in place to ban U.S. passport holders from traveling to Iran. Secretary Tillerson used that authority in 2017 after Otto Warmbier was tortured and killed in North Korea. And as a result, no Americans have gone to North Korea, and no Americans have been kidnapped and held hostage in North Korea. Again, if you dry up the supply, they cannot use them. They cannot use them as leverage. I understand it's a fraught question, and maybe you want to
please.
There's been recent public source reporting that the Iranians planned with Hamas this operation. I mentioned 5 objectives of the Trump administration. Those were long-term objectives. There was one short-term objective that we did meet, and that was depriving the regime of funds to use for the sponsorship of terrorism. Decrease of $50 billion per year. We bankrupted 18 out of 19 Iranian pension funds. Inflation over 40%, led to Iran increasing gas prices domestically, which led to Iranian protests domestically, led to Hezbollah, for the first time in history, making open pleas for donations because they lacked funding from the Iranians. And the fact of the matter is that Iran has become enriched, not only because of transfers or potential transfers of money from the United States to Iran, but because there's been a complete lack of sanctions enforcement. They've been making billions and billions and billions of dollars, and this money has found its way to Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and they knew more was coming. And so you have a report of $6 billion a few weeks ago that's being planned to release. Many times that amount of money has already been going to the Iranian regime, and that money has directly flowed to Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah.
I think that's a very important point, because there's a debate over the reporting, over how involved was Iran in these attacks, and there's no debate that they were involved, because as you say, Hamas can't do what they do, these groups can't do what they do without Iran. So we should start with that base point of Iran is involved, and then we can talk about how involved were they operationally, specifically, but it's incredibly important to note, yes, they were involved, and you know, please.
And just one point I wanted to pick up on, we had unilateral sanctions that were implemented in a multilateral way. And I think that was the beautiful combination.
Sure.
Leadership is not getting consensus in the UN. That's not leadership. Leadership is taking a strong, effective, moral policy position and getting your allies to follow you. And that's exactly what the Trump administration did. And that's, I think, distinct from how many other administrations approach diplomacy.
Nizar, please.
Yeah, for traveling, okay, you cannot travel, but Iranians who traveling to Iran, they end up traveling with an Iranian passport. Yeah. So what are we saying when we say American cannot travel to to Iran. We're saying that what we're telling the Iranian, what we're telling is that if you're traveling with your Iranian passport, we're not gonna follow, we're not gonna take care of you, we're not gonna get you back home. This is an issue that we cannot put all the burden on the Iranian on the American Iranian people. We need to be responsible for everyone, and we need to take actions on this. As far as the sanctions, yes, definitely the sanctions has been very during Trump have been very effective. But at the same time, we should remember that we left also during Trump administration. We left Sharmahd, and we left Imad, and we left Tahbaz behind. So it's not like 100% success on this matter.
Very quickly, and I think Gazelle wants to. So yes, we did not get every hostage out in the Trump administration, and that's something that we worked on every day and night, and we didn't succeed. It's not easy. One thing on the travel, yes, Iranian Americans with Iranian passports would still be able to travel. It would help prevent people like Xiue Wang, Michael White, who we spend a lot of time getting now. It would prevent people like that who don't need to travel to Iran to go. One other thing is, if you're an Iranian who wants to go visit a dying relative, or you're there to do aid work, in the legislation that's been introduced in the House, you can get a waiver from the Secretary of State for conditions like this. So it's not a blanket freeze. It's saying we want to deter. We want to make people who are just wanting to visit Qom or Tehran think twice and really question whether it's worth it. The intention is not to leave Americans behind, it's to dry up the supply a bit.
Yes, I just wanted to add to that, Nizar, I know you're thinking about victim blaming, and I understand you, but I would love to go to Iran. I would love to see my family. I would love to go to the prison or wherever they're holding my dad, and I can't. And if I can't, then other people shouldn't take this risk either, because Iran right now is not a travel place. Iran right now is an occupied territory, and we have to treat it as such. But that's just my opinion, and everybody can do that. What I wanted to talk about actually was what our experts were talking about, the sanctions and everything. And I agree with sanctions; they're fantastic, they're great. But if we don't see, again, as a layperson, I just look at the responses and everything, not at the details. If I don't see a reaction by the Islamic regime that when we put up sanctions, they stop hostage taking, or they stop their behavior, then I can assume that it didn't bother them, whether or not we enforced them or not, or if the sanctions weren't enough, I don't know. But I'm looking at Iran, I'm looking at the Islamic regime, and they're still continuing what they're doing. And I know the regime and the IRGC, how they operate is, they have all of these open borders, they have coasts, they are smuggling whatever they need is getting to Iran, one way or the other, if we put the sanctions or don't put the sanctions. They're getting their money there. They are doing deals, as we just said, they're selling the medicine, they're selling supplies, everything that we have in the US that they can get over there. They have McDonald's over there or something. They get everything over there. They open up political prisoners. They cut them open and sell their organs to Europe. Like, they are making billions. They are making billions. So coming back to everything that we're doing, it is good. We have to continue that. But it will not solve our problem until we treat the root cause of terrorism and hostage-taking. And the root cause is still the existence of the Islamic regime. And the only credible threat against this regime is a full-blown revolution. It is not going to be Europe, it is not going to be the US, it is not going to be Israel, it is going to be the people of Iran, because that's what they want. They want to do a revolution. So, which brings us back to, whatever we're doing, we did it wrong because we didn't listen to the people of Iran. And now the diaspora is here. The diaspora is in DC. We're being heard. So what we need to do, and it doesn't matter which administrations, it's not partisan, start talking to the diaspora, start talking to the people of Iran, and start supporting them, and cut your ties with the regime. That will solve the problem and not just patch it up.
So, regime change, I don't think, has ever been a policy of the United States, policy change has been a policy. I can't predict what will happen in the future, if Iran might cross certain red lines for a future administration whereby the policy might change. But I think I started by saying that sanctions is not the answer, because it can't be used as a strategy or a policy. It's a tool. And it has to be used in conjunction with other policy tools, including support potentially for dissident groups and obviously rediverting military assets to the Persian Gulf. But what we've seen is that the combination of sanctions and other policy tools have led to not only Iran changing policy direction, but also countries like Libya under Gaddafi making a change in policy and opening up their nuclear program for inspection. So I'm not sure if regime change will ever be part of US policy, but even short of that, sanctions in conjunction with other tools as part of a larger grand strategy could be. Unfortunately, I don't think any administration since 1979 has had that kind of holistic approach.
And then, you know, in your report, Andrew, one idea that I wanted to elaborate a little bit on is the idea of how do we put a cost on the next hostage that they take? And one idea that the Trump administration imposed in 2019 was, we said the Iranian diplomats who go to the UN, they're allowed to do that under a U.S. treaty. We said you can go to a 6-block travel radius. That's only around the UN headquarters. That's it. You can go back if you release the hostages in Tehran. And that policy was in place until February 2021. And then it was rescinded. They can now go 25 miles. That means they can go to Brooklyn, and where Masi's house was when they were trying to kill her. And the policy should be now, well, it should be twofold. One, we should, after what happened with Hamas, we should just put that down to 1 block right now. But say, look, the moment a next American gets put in prison and is wrongfully detained, they should be, that automatically goes to 1 block. Again, there's about 100 Iranian diplomats in UN. There's a lot. Yeah. They want to go shop at Gucci because that's what they do. They do not want to be stuck in Turtle Bay. And if you can put that specific, tangible cost and penalty on them, that they know that is the cost, they have to think twice. And that's what we always want them to be, thinking twice before they do this.
Thank you. So unfortunately, I think we went over time here, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. The last point, though, I want to make, we've never had a regime change strategy. One of the things that JINSA, my former organization, where Gabriel has advocated for, is a regime collapse strategy, which falls in line kind of with maximum support. And it basically just means empowering the Iranian people to help create regime change for themselves. And I think that's maybe the other angle to go. Sure, last comment?
Yeah, like in your report, one point was very important, is like money that we sanction from Iran to be used for democracy, to use it for the Iranian people, for democracy, instead of taking weapons and giving to Ukraine. It will be much better to use the money for empowering the Iranian people inside of Iran, for internet, to have internet access, to have democracy, capacity building, and this is how we can do the change from the inside.
Thank you guys for joining me on the panel. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ghazelle, Nizar, Gabriel, David, and Andrew. Please join us now for a brief networking and coffee break.